Hello! In this video I'm showing you how to replace a wheel head radiator valve, a lock shield radiator valve, or indeed any other type of radiator valve, so you can then fit a thermostatic radiator valve so you can fit your smart radiator thermostat. Once you've fitted your new smart radiator thermostat, whether it be Tado, Honeywell, Bosch, in fact the list of manufacturers is pretty much endless now, but you'll then be able to control that individual radiator from the app on your smartphone. Now I've been making a whole series of videos on the Hive system and how you go about fitting that on your traditional system or your combination boiler system and all the various options to go with the Hive system. If you want to watch any of those videos, of course you'll find those in the description below. I will be making more videos on various other manufacturers, so keep an eye out for those in the near future. Now just before I get on with the video, I got one last really important message for you. If you're thinking about fitting smart radiator thermostats to all your radiators in your house, well, stop right there. I did that and I fitted the smart thermostats to all the radiators in my house. And after about 6 months or so, I took half of them off again because I realized that my system, my boiler, just didn't like it at all. And I was actually damaging my boiler and system by having these smart thermostats on all my radiators. And because these new thermostats are a relatively new product, there seems to be very little information about what you should or shouldn't be doing and how to set them up. I would almost go as far as to say that I've been missold these smart radiator thermostats. Now don't get me wrong, I wanted to make my system as efficient as possible, but I also didn't want to reduce the life of my boiler. So I've made a video of all my findings when I fitted them to every radiator in my house and the pros and cons, so that when you come to fit them in your house, you install them correctly and get your system running as efficiently as possible. Having said all that, right, now let's get on with replacing this radiator valve. So here we have a wheel head radiator valve and we want to change this to our smart thermostatic radiator valve. Or you may have a lock shield radiator valve like this, which I'm also going to change to a smart radiator thermostat. Now for both radiators the procedure is exactly the same. Now it doesn't matter which smart thermostatic radiator valve you're going to use. On this occasion I'm using the Drayton Wiser radiator thermostat. But you could be using any smart thermostat from Hive, Tado, Bosch, Honeywell. So there's a pretty big list now of manufacturers who are making smart thermostatic radiator valves. All of those require that you have a thermostatic valve in place already. And that thermostatic valve should look something like this. So I need to replace this wheel head valve with this thermostatic valve instead. Now you probably have to buy a complete valve and head because there's not many brands selling the valve body on its own. So the first thing that I'm going to do is to go and turn my boiler off because I don't want my central heating running when I'm trying to change this valve. So there we go, that's my boiler now turned off and you can see the display has gone out. If you've got a traditional system where you have that large hot water tank, we're still going to need to turn the central heating off. So find the switch on the wall which turns off your heating and switch it off. Now whether you've got a combination boiler, a system boiler or a traditional system with loft tanks, you don't need to drain the entire system to change the radiator valve. On a combination boiler or a system boiler, we just need to drop the pressure so we can change the radiator valve. And on a traditional system where you have a loft tank, all I would do is to bung up the loft tank. That creates an airlock and stops the water from coming out. And if you want to know how to bung up your loft tank, obviously I've made a video on how to do that and you'll find that in the cards above now, all down in the description. So let's go back to our radiator. Now it doesn't matter what system you have, we now need to isolate the radiator from the rest of the system. So to do that, all we need to do is to close both the radiator valves. So I'm closing the wheel head, so I'm turning that all the way down, so that is now fully closed. Then I need to go to the radiator valve at the other end of the radiator and I need to close that one there as well. Now in this case I have a lock shield valve. Now these valves should just have a cap on top which you can just pull off or unscrew the screw and remove the cap, and then we can close the valve that way. Now this valve should be used to balance the system. That's to make the radiator run as efficiently as possible, whilst keeping the rest of the system balanced, so all the radiators come on equally. If you want to know about balancing your system, of course I made a video on how to do that. You find that in the cards or in the description below if you want to balance your system and make it more efficient. So when we close this radiator valve, we want to count how many turns it takes to close the valve. And then when we come to reopen it, when we finish the work, we then count the same number of turns as we open the valve, so the radiator remains balanced with the rest of the system. And there we go, my lock shield is now closed. So the radiator is now isolated from the rest of the system. So what we need to do now is to drop the pressure in the radiator. And to do that, we get our bleed key and then we open up the vent at the top of the radiator. So I then put my key in the valve and open it up. And then we're going to get some water coming out. So make sure that you've got a bowl handy to catch that water or a towel, and make sure you've got protection on your floor. Now I've opened up the bleed valve and I've got water coming out of the bleed valve and I'm catching it in a bowl. Now on this radiator, the water is coming out really fast and it's not slowing down. So this means that one of the radiator valves is very slightly open and is letting the pressure from the rest of the system come out through the bleed valve. Now we do want to drop all the pressure on this system, and we can do it by the bleed valve, but it might take some time. But I want to make sure both my valves are fully closed, especially the lock shield valve, because that valve will be creating our airlock and will stop the water coming out of the pipe when we remove the radiator valve. So now I check again to make sure that both these valves are closed fully. Now you can see the water has stopped coming out, so I know both the valves are closed. So now I've removed all the pressure from the radiator, but we still got pressure in the rest of the system. Now if I wanted to, I could continue to move the pressure from the system by using the bleed valve, but I'm going to do it from the radiator valve instead. And I'll show you how I go about doing that in just a minute. So the next thing that I'm going to do is to prepare the new thermostatic radiator valve to be fitted onto the radiator. Now I always use joining compound when I'm fitting radiator valves. I could use PTFE tape, but I just find joining compound is a lot easier. So what I've done is I've taken a small blob of joining compound and I'm just gently wiping it around the edge of the valve where the olive sits up against. And then when the valve is put onto the pipe and we do up the nut, the olive will be squeezed up against that joining compound and make a really good seal. Now you want to take your time over this. Don't put too much on because we don't want lots of joining compound being flushed around the system. Now you can put it on the olive, which is on the pipe. You don't have to do it this way, but this is the way which I've been doing it for years and years and years, and I find it works really well. So now that thermostatic radiator valve is prepared and ready to go straight onto the radiator. So the next thing that I'm going to do is to remove the old radiator valve. So I'm going to put a spanner on the nut just there. And now I've seen lots of videos where people say you can just turn this nut now and loosen it off. Now I never do that. I always support the radiator valve with a second pair of adjustable spanners, like I am here. Now if you don't support the radiator valve, there's a chance that the whole valve will turn and then it will again kink or damage the fitting underneath. And we don't want to damage that pipework below, because then we're going to have to repair that. So always support the radiator valve when you're undoing the nuts. Now hopefully you saw there, I just cracked open that bottom nut. I just turned it a quarter of a turn so that when I come to remove it in a minute, it'll come off nice and easily. Now just playing around with the radiator valve here, because I can tell there's lots of pressure in this radiator because it's trying to push the radiator valve off. And you can see there's quite a lot of water dripping out from that nut which joins onto the radiator. Now I've just got a piece of kitchen roll here, but you can use an old rag, and what I'm going to do is loosen off that nut completely which joins onto the radiator, and I've got a bowl underneath to catch any water, and I'm just going to gently pull that radiator valve off the radiator. And I've got the towel there because if there's a sudden spray of dirty water, hopefully it's going to catch that and stop it from spraying around. But you can see there actually not much came out at all. You just got to be prepared that there might be a lot of water which comes gushing out when you remove the radiator valve. But in this case, hardly anything came out at all. Now I'm just going to get a little bit of that kitchen roll. I'm going to tear it off and I'm just going to put it inside the radiator here in that little hole, because otherwise water will continue to glug out of the radiator. Don't use toilet paper because that will fall apart and you'll end up with bits stuck inside your radiator. You can use a wet wipe or anything just to stop the water from coming out. Now if you have a different type of radiator valve in your house, then I made a video a couple of years ago on all the different radiator valves and the eventualities you may come up against. So if you want to watch that video, you can find it in the cards above now, also down in the description. Now the next thing I'm going to do is optional again. I'm just going to rotate the radiator valve because I loosen that nut on the bottom and I can just rotate it around, and that points the radiator valve away from the radiator. Now I'm doing this because I still have pressure in the rest of the system and I need to release that pressure and drain that water out. And this is the quickest way of doing it. Now you don't have to twist the valve around like I have here, but it just makes life a lot easier. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up that radiator valve and release the pressure from the rest of the system. Now the radiator valve is not coming undone, so I'm going to have to just hold it with my spanner and then open it up there. And there we go, it's opened up and a bit of water's come out. And now I can now open that valve and you can see that water is now coming out of the system. So I'm dropping the pressure on the rest of the system. And there we go, you can see I'm catching it in my bowl. And there's quite a bit of water to come out. Now, like I said, you could bleed this out through your bleed valve, but that would take absolutely ages. So this is the quickest way to do it. Now, if you have a traditional system and you've bunged up the loft tank, we need to do exactly the same thing. We open up the radiator valve and water will start coming out. And then we just got to wait until the water stops coming out of the radiator valve. And on all systems, we are creating an airlock. And that's why we need to have that other radiator valve closed to create that airlock. So if no air can get in, then no water can come out. Now I'm just going to screw on the tail for the new radiator valve here. The only reason I'm doing that is to stop the water from spraying around. You see, it just helps it come out in a nice clean flow now. And like I said, you just keep going until it stops coming out. And then we know we have created that airlock. And we can remove the radiator valve without water spraying around everywhere. Now on some occasions water will keep coming out and you can still change the radiator valve, but obviously you just need to be a bit quick so you don't end up with a flood on your hands. You may need to have a couple of bowls so you can swap them over as they get filled. Now you can see I'm opening the valve all the way up now because the water is slowing right down, and at any second the water will stop completely. So now there's just a little bit of water running out, so I'm just going to close the radiator valve and I'm going to undo the nut here and I'm going to remove the radiator valve. And now you can see there's still a bit of water running out, but I'm catching it in my bowl. So now I could take the new thermostatic radiator valve and put it on the pipe and do up the nut, and then remove the piece of kitchen roll from the radiator and push the valve onto the radiator and then do up the nut. But on this occasion, I've decided to replace the olives and the nuts, mainly because the nuts are just slightly different chrome color. They're more of a bluey silver, and the nuts on the radiator and pipework are more of a goldy silver. So if your nuts and olives are in perfectly good condition, despite what other people may say, there's no need to replace them. You can fit the radiator valve straight onto the old nuts and the olives, and they'll seal up absolutely fine. Now I'm using a special olive removing tool to remove the old olive and the nut, but you don't need to use a tool. In fact, I very rarely actually use this particular tool. And I've made a video on 5 different ways how you can remove an olive. So if you want to know some easy ways to remove an olive, then you can check that video out and I'll leave it in the cards above and down in the description. Now I've already put the new nut and olive on the pipework. Now I can put the new nut and a new olive onto the radiator. Now if you find that your new olive is a little loose on your pipework because the pipe has been crushed, there's not a lot you can do about it. Now I've got several different olives and I'm just deciding on one to use. So I'm using a slightly larger olive and it's a brass olive, but I'm also going to use some PTFE tape. So I'm just going to push the nut down the pipework just a little bit more by using my adjustable spanners. And then I'm going to get the PTFE tape and then carefully wrap the PTFE tape around the olive. You can also use this method instead of using joining compound, but take your time, carefully wrap it around, maybe about 10 times. And the part you want to pay particular attention to is where the olive pushes up against the radiator valve. That's the part which does all the sealing. And you can see I'm carefully wrapping it around there, and I'm turning the olive and I'm letting the PTFE tape get wrapped around the pipe and the olive. So I can now fit the new thermostatic radiator valve. I've still got joining compound on there. I'm going to leave that on there because that's going to act as some belt and braces and just make sure that there's definitely going to be no leaks. So I removed a bit of kitchen roll from the radiator. I'm not going to bother putting PTFE tape on this olive, so I'm just going to put it straight on top of the pipework like that. I can then push the radiator valve onto the radiator. Now you can see that I'm struggling here to get the radiator valve to fit onto the radiator. And that's because the new radiator valve is a slightly different shape to the old radiator valve. So the new thermostatic radiator valve is now slightly higher than the spigot on the radiator. Now if your pipework moves up and down in the floor, then that's not a problem at all. But my pipework has a fixed height and I cannot move it up and down. And I don't want to lift the radiator up so all the weight is on the radiator valve. So I'm going to trim a little bit of pipe off the pipework. And there we go, that's a little bit I've just trimmed off. Now I refit the nuts, refit the olive, and then wrap some more PTFE tape around the olive. I can now refit the radiator valve. I just put a bit more joining compound on there, like that. Removed a bit of kitchen roll, pop on the radiator valve, and then do up the two nuts. And there we go, and now I'm ready to tighten them up. Now I'm just nipping the nut up on the radiator to hand tight. Then I can go to the nut on the pipework and do that one up nice and tight. And make sure that that olive is squashed down onto that compressed bit of pipework. I can now tighten up that nut on the radiator. So once again, I support the radiator valve and then I can do up the nut because I don't want the radiator valve to twist and kink that bit of pipework. And there we go. That's nice and tight. If I wanted to, I could now fit the thermostatic head, which came with the valve. But I'm going to be fitting the Drayton Wiser Radiator Thermostat. But of course now you can fit any Smart Radiator Thermostat and be able to control this radiator from the app on your phone. So now I need to refill the system and turn the boiler back on. I'm very quickly just going to jump in here and introduce myself. My name is Mark Ballard and I've been a gas registered engineer for nearly 30 years. The aim of my channel is to help you with your central heating and your plumbing. If you find this video at all useful, then please give me that little bit of feedback by clicking on that thumbs up or the subscribe. You can ring on the bell if you want to receive a notification, and of course you can share the video with your friends. And I'd like to say a really big thank you to everybody who's bought me a cup of coffee and left me a donation in my toolbox fund. It's really appreciated and it does really help me to make more videos which will hopefully help you. I can now top the pressure up between 1 and 1.5 bar, and then I can turn my boiler on. And there we go, the boiler's back on now. If you've got a traditional system, you can switch it back on. And if you bunged up your loft tank, you can now remove the bungs. We can then go back to our radiator valve and check it for leaks. I'm using a bit of toilet paper here, just carefully going around the nut to make sure there are no little damp spots suddenly appear on that tissue. And of course there's not. So now I'm ready to fit my new Smart Radiator Thermostat. So the first thing I'm going to do is to get my smartphone and open up the app. So I tap on the Wiser app like that. That opens it up. Then I go to settings at the top. And then I look down here and look for devices, and then I want to add a device. Click on the plus, and then you can see I've got a list of things I can select. I'm going to select thermostat, and now you can see on the bottom there it says joining. So now all I need to do is to add the batteries into the thermostat. So now I need to remove the cover, so I push that little clip and then the cover will release, and then I can fit the batteries into the thermostat. So there we go, that's the cover. Now make sure you put the batteries the right way round, because if you get it the wrong way round, it's not going to work. So there we go, insert the two batteries like that, put the last one in, then I can put the cover back on like that, just push it up and it snaps into position. And now all three lights have started flashing on the front of the thermostat. And now I rotate the thermostatic head to the plus symbol, then the lights change and now it's just the green light which is on. The app is still searching for the thermostat, and after about 20 seconds the lights change on the front of the thermostat and the app changes to tell me to fit the thermostat onto the valve. Now I put the little black adapter on, and then the chrome collar to hold the adapter in place, and I screw that down like that. Now I screw the thermostat onto that adapter. I'll be careful that I don't rotate the top, so I'm just holding the thermostat at the bottom and rotating it around until it goes tight. There we go, it's just about tight there. A couple more turns and there we go, that's now tight. But you can see that the lights are around the back. So I loosen the chrome collar. I can then rotate the thermostat back round so it's facing forwards, and then I tighten up that chrome collar again. So now the thermostat is fitted onto the valve. I now need to calibrate the thermostat to the valve, and then it will all be finished. So I just need to open up the app again, and it's telling me I can fit them in either orientation, straight up, or on its side. And now to put the thermostat into calibration mode. I now turn the thermostatic head towards the minus. That's going to make the thermostat go into calibration mode. So I turn it around like that, hold it there for 2 seconds and then release. And then the blue light comes on, indicating it's now in calibration mode. I'll hear a couple of buzzes as the thermostat fully closes and then fully opens again. All the lights have gone out, so the thermostat is now done. I can now click on next, and then it allows me to add a name to this device. So I'm going to call this thermostat dining room. There we are. Then I click on tick like that. Then the app finishes the setup, and there we go, we get a big tick, and that's it, I'm all done. And now you can see I've got this big list of devices here. Now I can click on the back arrow and the back arrow again, and then this is my home screen, and I can scroll down to find the thermostat, which is in the dining room. There's the dining room, it's showing that it's 25 degrees. I can now put that temperature right up like that. There we are, the flame's on. And now I should hear a little buzzing from the thermostat as it opens up. I can easily turn it back off again by just sliding that dial right down. And again, I'll hear a little buzzing from the thermostat. And then that's the radiator turned off. Now I can turn my heating on from the thermostat, so I can just turn the head. You can see it's turned to red. And if I just go back to the home screen again by pressing the back arrow, and then I scroll down to that dining room thermostat, and you'll see it is now come on. There we are, it's just come on. You show the temperature there, and if I turn it back down again by turning the thermostatic head towards the minus, the blue light comes on to show that I'm turning the thermostat down, and then the heating should turn off on the app. And there we go, that's the new Drayton Wiser Smart Radiator Thermostat, all fitted and up and running. Now if you want to know more about the Drayton Wiser control system, I have made a video all about those controls. Just click the link in the description below. Right, that's about it then. So I do hope my video has been helpful to you. If you want to watch my video on things you should know before you go fitting your smart thermostats, then click on that link just there. If you want to know more about the Hive products, then click on that link just there. You can click on subscribe, ring on the bell to get a notification, give me a thumbs up if the video has been useful to you, and of course share it with your friends. And there's always my toolbox fund if you'd like to get me a cup of coffee. Bye for now, see you in the next video.